All right, so everybody listening, if you're listening to us on one of the radio stations, we greatly appreciate you. And thanks so much for listening. Please tell your family, your friends, anybody you can get your hands on to listen to our programs. We're trying to get as many people to hear these stories as possible. If you're listening to us on the podcasting sites or on YouTube, we greatly appreciate that also. Rumble also. And please just like, share, subscribe those if you could. We really are trying to get this out on those platforms. Also, we have a special guest from React 19, react19.com. It is Julia Mark. She's going to tell the audience her story of what she's been through the past 2 years. And we've had these stories before. We hope people listen with an open mind. This is not a political story. This is not a anti-vaccine story. This is a story about a woman that's in her family that's been through the ringer, I should say, too. Julia Marks, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you for giving us this platform, for supporting free speech. And there's absolutely nothing more important to me now than free speech, being able to warn people of the dangers that, they may not know about, and just supporting body autonomy. So I'm going to share a little bit about myself and how I came into this. My name is Julia Marks. I'm a registered nurse. I was injured by the Moderna vaccine in January, February 2021. I pretty much ran to go get the vaccine. I wasn't working at the time, but I believed it to be safe and effective. And I also vaccinated my 2 older children. So I strongly believed in the vaccines. And this has propelled me back into a nursing role as a patient advocate for the vaccine injured React 19. I've heard and seen too much to sit by quietly and not try to get the word out. The CDC and the FDA is utterly broken. It's a front for a sales department at the vaccine and pharmaceutical industry. My reaction started the night after my second injection. I had a headache and fever, which I was told to be expected. I took Tylenol. I woke with flu-like symptoms, nausea, muscle aches, frequent urination. I had some diarrhea. So on day 3, I tried to resume activity, and I noticed I had double vision and my lips were swollen. So I said, okay, I'm having a robust response to the vaccine. I was very happy about it. I said, but I do need to take some Benadryl and force a liter of fluids. So I did that. And I had never really heard of a reaction that became chronic. So I wasn't overly concerned. I didn't even call my doctor. I was weak and I was dizzy, but I had eaten very little in those 3 days. And I just said I just need to sleep it off. So it wasn't until 4.5 months later, on June 19th, 2021, that my 2 left toes on my left foot went numb. And I knew that was neurological. I know how neurological events start. As a nurse, I'd taken care of patients that had neurological injuries, and I said, this isn't good. I immediately called my brother, who's younger, and said, I don't know what is happening, but this isn't good. I called my husband. We were actually living on a sailboat in the Caribbean. I could not get to a doctor, so I just told him, I said, I'm going to have to get to a doctor if this continues to go up my leg. So I just kind of watched it and waited because it wasn't painful or anything. It was just kind of strange. And then one day, I started repeating everything my husband said. So if he said, I thought it was going to rain today, but it's turned out to be beautiful, I repeated those words back to my family. And my kids thought it was really funny. They said, oh, mom must be dehydrated. She's, and I probably was a little bit overheated. But I had never done anything like that before. And to say the least, it was very frightening to me to know that I was repeating everything that was said. And around the same time, I started choking on things I was eating and drinking. Mind you, here I am in the Caribbean. I can't really do anything about it, but I'm getting more and more concerned. And so I do fly back to Florida to go see a doctor. And by that time, I had a fine tremor in my hands. And I went to my doctor and I said, something's wrong. I've got this ascending paresthesia in my left foot. And by that time, my hands were shaking, sort of like I had Parkinson's. And he said, tell me in your own words, what this feels like. I said, it feels like a neurotoxin. And so he ended up ordering a bunch of labs, and it came back that I had super high levels of mercury, arsenic, cadmium, and thallium. And I was immediately like, how did I get this? I said, oh, well, it must have happened on the boat. So we were all eating and drinking the same exact thing on the boat. So I had my husband tested and my children tested, my 4 children. I said, we must all have mercury poisoning, and I'm just the first one to show it. And all of their results came back negative. They didn't have anything. The only difference was before we got on that boat, I took the Moderna shot and they took Pfizer. And, after speaking to the vaccine injured, I don't think there's one that's better than another, but that was the only thing I could even find that was different, because we were eating and drinking the same exact thing. So I went to an emergency room and I showed them the results, and I expected that they would call a neurologist and try to treat me for heavy metal poisoning. And they said, oh, we are not going to call a neurologist. Go home. We don't treat that. Well, I was jerking and twitching, and my whole body was like, lifting out of the bed when I was sleeping. And I was having all of these, neurological symptoms. And I just kind of, I was sitting in neurologist's office just saying, if someone doesn't show up, can you see me? Because I had a 4.5-month wait to see a neurologist. And so, finally I got admitted at the University of Miami. I was tachycardic, I was hypertensive, and I had this ascending numbness and tingling, strange sensation, primarily on my left side. And before this, I had never been on any medication. I had 0 limitations. This was so unusual for me. So thankfully they did admit me, and they did a bedside lumbar puncture, but they looked at it. They said it was clear. They said there was no protein in it, and they discarded my lumbar puncture sample. And I was devastated. I was like, why would you discard my sample? I'm telling you, I need to be tested. There's something going on in my system. I need to find out, what's happened to me. And I was discharged, and I waited another few months to see that neurologist. And when I did, one of the first things she said was, why didn't they test your lumbar puncture for fluid? And she ran all the tests. And she found I had super high lymphocytes in the brain and blood. And I was having some kind of inflammatory reaction. This is now 10 months later before I got in. So it was, I was so scared to even say I was vaccine injured or anything. I was, because when I had gone to University of Miami, I said, I want to be tested for Guillain-Barré. And I said, well, since they discarded my sample, I've got to be extra careful this time and, not mention anything, so, but she was wonderful. She was from Cleveland Clinic, and I highly recommend Cleveland Clinic. They seem like they're publishing, the truth. And, after I had all my tests done with her, I said, could this be related to the vaccine? And she said, we could never know for sure, I said, would it be ever safe for me to take a booster? And she said, I wouldn't, not if I'd been through what you went through. And that was the confirmation and the validity that I needed personally, because I didn't believe in that vaccines weren't safe. So I actually saw 3 neurologists before I accepted that I did not have multiple sclerosis, because I was pretty positive that that's what I had. And I mean, the strangest things were happening. In my peripheral nervous system, my pinkies were numb. I had extreme sensitivity to light and sound. I used to tell my husband that my eyelids were too thin, that I had to keep a pillow over my head and go to a dark room, because the light was so bright. I couldn't block it out by closing my eyes. And like there was this one time where I was being so forgetful, and I went to go pick up my kids at school, and I have 4 kids. I'm in and out of the carpool line all day. Well, I was running out of gas every single day. Well, it took me weeks to figure out that I wasn't turning the car off. So because I don't have a key that operates my car, I just have a button. So I was coming home and pulling up in the driveway and walking inside without turning the car off. But
Wow.
I thought somebody was stealing my gas, because I didn't know that I was forgetting to turn the car off. So one day I actually run out of gas in the car pickup lane. And I call my husband, and I say I ran out of gas again. And he's, yelling at me at this point. And he brings me the gas can and he leaves it with me, because he's, got to leave work to bring me gas. And I'm putting the gas in my car, and I don't realize that I'm standing in an ant pile. Well, I've got ants all over my legs, but the neuropathy
Wow.
was so bad that I didn't know that I had ants on me. It felt like the neuropathy. I couldn't tell the
Are we
difference.
talking about regular ants or red ants? Because
They were red ants. I was eaten up.
wow.
I was eaten up because I couldn't feel them.
Hmm.
I was just having a really bad, flare at that point. So, the brain fog, I felt like I was dying. I felt like I was getting Alzheimer's, but I had multiple sclerosis and I was crying all the time. And by this time, I was like suicidal. And my doctor had pretty much kind of abandoned me and given me sleeping medicine and antidepressants. And he told my husband that I needed like cognitive behavioral therapy, and asked me, how my marriage was going. And I was so devastated that the one person that was supposed to be interested in my health, my doctor,
Yeah.
didn't believe me.
Yeah.
And even though I had heavy metal poisoning, even though I had the lymphocytes, I even went back to my neurologist and I said, "Is there any chance that I have FND?" And she goes, "No." She says, "You have every reason to have the symptoms you do. You have all these positive tests." So I was like, "Okay." I just, you know, um,
Well, they
I
made
said,
you think, as they've made me think, they make you think you're crazy. They
"Oh,
just want to put you
completely."
on these depression pills and
And I
call it a
wanted to
day.
believe it. I wanted to believe I was just batshit crazy, because that
Yeah.
you could treat. And so I took the medicine, and I took it for like a month. And I was like, wow, this isn't, I'm sleeping all the time. I can't really function. It doesn't take away any of the symptoms. And so, I thank goodness, the negative, like suicidal feelings didn't last. I realized I was just feeling trapped, and nobody knew what was happening to me. And but that I loved my family, loved my children. I definitely didn't want to leave them without a mother.
Yeah.
So
How did they get on with all this?
it was, remember in the beginning I didn't know I was vaccine injured,
Right.
so
You didn't know.
I thought I was developing MS or something. So I sent my kids to camp, and because I was crying all day long, I didn't want them to see me crying. And they got COVID the first week at camp. So so
It's
then they came home and they all had COVID. And I couldn't even take care of myself. My kids ate cereal for dinner for like a year, because
oh,
mom was too sick. By 3, 4 o'clock, I was in bed, curled up in a
wow.
fetal position. I just I couldn't take any stimulation. I didn't want to be alone. I wanted somebody to be with me, especially when I did like the really large jerks, the myoclonic jerks or the twitching. Like I wanted my husband or one of my children to say, put their hand on me and say, yeah, mom, I felt that. Because it's like I couldn't go through it completely alone. I needed them to know that, because so much of this is an invisible illness. So when you do have something that somebody can see, you want them to say, oh yeah, oh, I saw that, mom. Oh, that must be awful. So I started, it just feels like the autoimmune wheel of misfortune has been spun. And I don't know where it's going to land. But in my case, it looks like, in 5, 10, maybe I'll get 15 years before I develop MS. But this feels very much like my peripheral nervous system is under attack, and particularly like my left foot. So I'm just like, yep, that's the foot I'm going to get drop foot in, and yep. But I'm very positive. Like I know now that whatever happens, it's going to be okay. I know I have things that to live for, and it's not going to be the end. It's just we're going to live with some chronic illness related to this. And I have complete hope that my children and husband will never be affected by it. I don't know if that's just, survival mechanisms kicking in, but, I feel like they're going to be okay. The one concerning, thing that came up recently is, John Campbell had done that release on the World Health Organization,
Right.
saying that the COVID-19 vaccination can induce multiple sclerosis via cross-reactivity, CD4, T cells, recognizing SARS-CoV-2 spike protein and myelin peptides. So I was like, yeah, could have told you that back in June. That's so I talked to the vaccine injured and I listened to them and try to help them communicate with their doctors and know what to ask to have ruled out, and do whatever they can to mediate the symptoms. I followed the FLCCC protocol for, supplements. And if I found out I had low vitamin D and low B12, I took B12, I took vitamin D. So I didn't just indiscriminately take stuff, but, and I found that, sometimes even supplements can be inflammatory. So I tried to get as much as I could from my diet. So I wasn't eating a whole lot of meat when we were on the boat. It's hard to have enough energy with solar power to cook meat. So, when I was home, I started to eat a lot of lamb, beef, eggs, things that were higher in B12 that would protect my nervous system. I want to enable my body to heal itself. And I do believe we have the ability to heal.
Can I just interject because,
Sure.
obviously, you've been through the ringer. With that said, how has your body changed since this started back in June of 2021 up until now, where we're in July of 23?
So much better. I'm so much better. So June of 19,
as a percentage though, Julia,
yeah.
what were you at
So,
as far as percentage and what are you
so
now?
I never lost the ability to walk. I was always able to walk. In the beginning, I would say just shuffle back and forth to the bathroom, mainly because of the peripheral neuropathy. But like I didn't have I didn't have the burning neuropathy. I had more paresthesias, and like when I would hit my elbows, I would feel a shock that went to my fingers.
Oh, wow.
So I mean, I could trace my nervous system with a ballpoint pen. I knew exactly where the nerve ran. And so that only lasted for me at that real high crisis level for 5 months. So I would call that between like an 8 and a 9. And now on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm probably at a 1 or a 2. So I'm so much better. I can ignore the symptoms I have now. Yeah, I notice I've got a little neuropathy in my fingertips. My pinky feels a little bit more numb. I can tell my left foot is still kind of under attack, particularly my Achilles tendon. I can kind of feel that nerve. there is working at it. But in general, I don't focus at all on my symptoms. I listen to everybody else's, and that's my therapy. And I look at it as I listen to Rob's symptoms and, all my injured family. I'm going to heal them, and then I'll know how to heal myself. And I do believe so much is going to come out of this. There's such an opportunity now for researchers to learn from us. I mean, you can watch autoimmune disease as it develops. There's so much data that's being, missed. Mount Sinai has their microclot study going on. Yale has a study that's also including vaccine injured. They're doing blood and saliva samples. They did have their NIH funding pulled, probably because they're studying vaccine injury. But, we can still partake in all the surveys, and I know they did get quite a bit of DNA samples from people before they were shut down. So I'm very encouraged that we're going to learn a lot from all of this, and we'll find something to mediate this inflammation.
Yeah, because it really is all about inflammation.
So I want to tell you a little bit of some of the stories that I hear
Sure.
taking calls from the vaccine injured, because it's almost predictable that I'm going to be talking to somebody who's younger, who didn't have any health problems before. They were
What
in
is the median
tip-top shape.
age? Sorry to interrupt. What is the median age that you're usually talking to?
Women in
30s,
their
20s?
40s. Women in their 40s
Oh,
is,
wow.
I would say it's like 75% women, 25%
Wow.
men. But people that had very high physical endurance levels. So your Spartan race runners,
Yeah.
your CrossFit people, anybody who was a competitive athlete, they believe it's because they had more ACE2 receptors, but they probably had kick-ass immune systems. And I think they just produced more spike protein from that mRNA, because not everybody produced the same amount of spike protein from the same amount of mRNA. That's one thing that they've found, is some people, their bodies are more factories of spike than others. And one of the things I can't stand to hear is the naysayers will say, oh, well, if you had a car accident after you had your vaccine, you couldn't say that it was caused, that the car accident was caused by the vaccine. And I've always hated that, because, for one, a car accident has nothing to do with your immune system, and a vaccine is meant to stimulate your immune system. That's how it works. So if you have a hyperimmune response, you should, and it happened shortly after you took the vaccine, you should expect that that the vaccine might have had something to do with that. And I don't think it's a simple one-time incident of a car accident, because when I interview the vaccine injured, they have 20, 25, 30 symptoms. And they're all the same symptoms, which is, I find, so compelling in all of this. So it's not a car accident, it's a massive car crash pileup that happens daily. And you can't discount 30,000 people in the social media groups and Facebook who all have these same 23 to 30 something symptoms. That all happened shortly after they got the vaccine. That's not a coincidental anomaly like a car accident. I have found that there seems to be certain predictive factors in all of this. And, I ask a zillion questions when I'm interviewing the injured. And a lot of us have this mother gene. I don't know if you've heard about the MTHFR gene, but it makes it to where you don't methylate, or you don't break down chemicals and toxins easily.
Mhm.
So you're more likely to have a vaccine reaction if you have this mother gene, but a large portion of people do. I happen to have two mutations. It's also one of the predicting factors for developing MS is if you have two mutations, then you're more likely to go on to develop certain autoimmune conditions. One of the major things, I look back, as I'm talking to people, and I think so many nurses and doctors have been adversely affected by this, is because they probably already had COVID before they got their shot. So nobody's talking about high viral loads and titers. But as a nurse, we every time I took a new job, I had to prove I had titers that covered me on immunity for, tuberculosis and hepatitis and all of the um, things that they'd screen you for and ask you to get a vaccine for.
Mhm.
And I'm sure those nurses and doctors that were taking care of COVID patients, that they probably had a high viral load before they got vaccinated and had taught their cells to make a toxic spike protein. So I'm not at all surprised that they're some of the worse off in this. We had people that were allergic to the flu vaccine. Well, that wasn't even asked, before someone got the shot. There was like no informed consent that certain things would give you a worse chance in having this work out positively for you. I think V-Safe when
Yeah.
the ICANN sued the government for the V-Safe data. 7.7% had to seek medical attention, most of the time, 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
So, these were pretty severe reactions. And there was no information being given to the doctors that said, if you have a patient that comes in and said they had a reaction of any kind that was, more severe, that they
Right.
had to come in and see you, you should be telling them not to get another one.
Right.
So I talked to those people that said, oh, yeah, I went to my doctor and they said, yeah, it'd be fine. Go ahead and get the next one. Well, now they're really bad off. Now they have, severe tinnitus and headaches every single day. And, they've lost the ability to drive and some of them can't walk. And and before they were bodybuilders and,
Yeah.
in tip top shape. I mean, the safety level should be raised for healthy people getting a vaccine. It shouldn't, before all of this, mRNA had only been studied in cancer patients.
Right.
So we don't know how healthy people, how their body reacts to making this toxic spike.
I want to ask you this quick question though, Julia. Again, Julia Moxie on Firebreathinrob, react19.com. Definitely check it out, regardless of how you feel on this topic. I'm sure, and I know this for a fact, that when I've talked to and interviewed people on not COVID or anything to do with COVID, I tell my story to them, a very short story about that. And they say my sister, my brother, my niece, my nephew, or somebody else had a reaction, friend, family member, regardless to the vaccine, and they want to hear and tell their story. Really, a lot of great resources. Again, react19.com. I want to ask you, we have a lot of people listening that are very to the left. I hate to bring politics into this. Politics should not be spoken about when people's lives are in danger or people are suffering in general from any kind of illness in general. But we do have to bring this up. I know a lot of people that are just worried about let me frame it this way and I'll edit this part out. I just want to bring this up, Julia, about people that are in this kind of psychosis cult mode where they believe everything the government says. If you bring up vaccine injury, they think you're spreading some kind of anti-vax. I don't know how that could be if you got the vaccine, obviously, but that's par for the course. It's people without their critical thinking caps on. How do we talk to these people about injury, about about these shots in general and how they are toxic shots for a lot of people?
I just feel like health it's not political.
Right.
freedom of speech. It's not political.
Right.
What I decide is right for me and my family, it's nobody else's business. These are my choices. But don't you want a government that supports people who did what was asked of them? Don't you want research to be done so that we can figure out, why these young, super athletic, some young boys that are dying from these shots? It's kind of hard to argue with deaths, but most of the conditions that I hear about aren't the deaths. They're the chronic neurological injuries that people are now living with. So, I mean, I think people are generally, whether they're Republican or Democrat, they're worried about Social Security. And Social Security is funded by working people. But now we have a bunch of disabled people that were of working age. They were gainfully employed when they got a shot to keep their job, and now they can't work. What are we going to do about that? Are we going to continue to not research what is being told to you? I mean, just open your mind enough to consider the possibility that what I'm saying is the truth. We're the canaries in the coal mine, okay? We're the first to be affected. They're planning on putting this mRNA in all of these shots to come. And, I protect anyone's right to continue getting vaccinated. It's not my decision, but I want them to have informed consent. We still have a blank envelope, when you open it up, safety envelope that would normally tell you, that you might develop MS, you might develop giant cell arteritis, you might develop polymyalgia rheumatica, all of those things that would normally be on that little folded piece of paper. It says left intentionally blank. So as hard as it is to hear, if you took a shot that was authorized, thinking that meant licensed, like I did, I didn't realize there was a difference. I thought if it was authorized for emergency use, that meant it was licensed. No, it wasn't licensed. You took an experimental vaccine and you consented to be, without consent, you consented to be in a study. And, and there's a lot of data they have there. 10 million people enrolled in VSafe. But they just had to check the box for sore arm and headache, even though they knew it was causing myocarditis, even though they knew Maddie DeGarry, had become paralyzed in the trials. They already knew all of that. They knew they had 1,220 something deaths. So they had a lot of information, but they didn't put the symptoms of the things that those people died from, the thrombocytopenias, HLH, vaccine-induced thrombocytopenia, ITP. They didn't put the symptoms of all those things, bleeding, bruising, to alert people that if these things happen, you need to see your doctor. This isn't normal. These aren't expected. So I think I'm at the point where, I just want the public to demand transparency and safety from our public health regulatory body, and they can't be selling and marketing things that have not been approved and not doing the safety studies on them. It's unreal.
And I agree with you 100%. And, the only way that this stuff is going to change is if people keep coming out and telling their stories. And I'm grateful that you came on and told your story. I know we're just touching the surface. There's way more than even what you just spoke about. But, hopefully people that listen to this on whatever platform they're listening to this on we'll take this serious. Know that this is not a joke. People are really suffering right now and struggling. It's not only just the people that are suffering, it's their families suffering too. So I think you put it great. And I do hope that people that do know people that are suffering or are suffering themselves go to react19.com. It's react19.com. Again, Julia Marks, thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you. And if I could just plug
Sure.
React 19, I'm absolutely astounded by the vision of Brianne Dressen, who was in the AstraZeneca trials, and Dr. Walskog. They created a care fund so that people could go outside the rigged system and get the tests they needed. And we donate to people who are vaccine injured so that they can get tested and they can find out, you know, what they can do to mitigate the damage that's been done to their body. And if you could support that care fund or the research that we're doing, you could text the word REACT, that's REACT, to 50155 to fund research and support for the injured. It would mean so much to so many people. And there's really nothing more rewarding than helping people who cannot help themselves.
We
So
all,
thank you for having me, Rob.
yeah, Julia, we all trying to do something good for ourselves, for the community, keep people healthy, obviously ourselves too. And we listened to people that apparently weren't looking out for our best interests, and we're just looking to make the almighty buck. And a lot of people got hurt, including myself, throughout this. And we're all struggling and fighting hard for each other, and obviously for ourselves and our family to get better and live healthy, safe lives. So again, Julia
Nobody's
Moss.
going to fight. Nobody's going to fight as hard as you're going to fight for yourself. So never give up.
Right. Julia Mox, React 19, REACT 19.com. Please check out the website. And if you can donate, please look into that too on the website. Thanks so much, Julia.
Thank you.
I got my COVID-19 vaccination, and here's why. This isn't about gimmicks or sentiment or what commercial I like. This is about facts. COVID-19 vaccines are safe and effective. Millions of doses have already been given in the United States, and these vaccines have the most intensive safety monitoring in U.S. history. People from different races, ages, genders, and ethnicities participated in large clinical trials around the world to make sure this vaccine worked for all kinds of people. The amount of time and effort dedicated to developing these vaccines was huge. Scientists used existing research and technology so they could get the vaccines developed quickly and safely without skipping any steps. If you need any more information, use a reliable source like the CDC website to get the facts.